Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Drinking with Authors. And I might mispronounce your name. This is Kevin Lucia.
Lucia.
What is
But
it?
Lucia.
Lucia.
I've heard
Okay, a little softer on the C.
I've heard Lucia. I've heard Luca. I've heard Lucia. I've heard every variation there is. So
Okay, so soft C, Lucia. Okay. We're here with Kevin, and he's going to talk about an anthology that he edited that I actually have a story in called Liminal Spaces. Okay, and then we're also going to talk about one of his novels called The Night Road. But before that, let's have Kevin introduce some of his other stuff, and then we'll talk about what we're drinking. So go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. Obviously, my name is Kevin Lucia. Most of my work is published through Crystal Lake Publishing, run by Joe Mindhart. A lot of my books take place in this small mythical town. I mean, I grew up in love with Bradbury's, Connected Universe and Castle Rock. And there's an author by the name of Charles Grant where he created his own little town. So that was something that I wanted to do too. So most of my books, like my most recent book through Crystal Lake came out in the fall called October Nights. It's a Halloween collection. And they're all mostly through Crystal Lake. And they're all in the same town. I wrote them purposely so they could be read in any order. So it's not a sequential part 1, part 2, part 3. You could pick up the 4th book in the series, then go back and read the 1st book and not necessarily, feel like it. It's just at a certain point when you've read enough of them, you're going to see the overlapping layers and characters that drift in and out of the stories. I'm also recently took on the position of the ebook and paperback editor at Cemetery Dance Publications. Which is kind of a new thing. The Cemetery Dance has been around for a really long time. I mean, Richard Chismar started it in his college dorm in 1988. And they've specialized, with limited editions and the magazine. But they wanted to start a small press line, which, where our books be through Amazon, be through Ingram Spark. And so I took over that position back early in the fall. So I wear that hat too. So and somewhere in there, I also teach high school English. When I have the extra time. So
yeah, like I teach college math. Yes, in all my spare time. So yes, people, Kevin is somebody you definitely want to get to know because of that whole Cemetery Gates connection there. Because who knows, maybe he'll be publishing some of your short stories or your novels even in the future. Yeah. So keep Kevin on your radar. At the end of the little interview here, you can tell everybody where they can find you on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. For now, let's shift into Liminal Spaces. So you did not actually have a story in Liminal Spaces.
No.
Yeah, you were just the editor for it. So why don't you talk a little bit about what your idea was for the theme for this anthology and you went about finding authors for it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I've had the urge to edit an anthology for a really long time. But it was one of those things where, print on demand was a great revolution in publishing, but at first everybody was doing it, and you have anthologies come out where they're like, oh, we're paying you 1 cent a word or half a cent a word, or we're giving you free copies for exposure. So I was like, I want to bide my time. I only want to edit an anthology that can pay pro rates. So it's kind of just waited for that. This is something I've wanted to do for like 10 years or so, but I just wanted to wait until I developed a relationship with a publisher that could pay those rates. Also, though, too, I came to horror a little bit late. I discovered Stephen King in my mid to late 20s, and then in my 30s, mid 30s, discovered all these other authors. A really key component were these classic horror anthologies like Shadows, edited by Charles Grant, and Whispers, edited by Stuart David Schiff, who actually lives in Binghamton. It kind of blows my mind a little bit. Borderlands by Tom Montilone, or Masks by J.N. Williamson. And what was great about these anthologies is they didn't have a hard theme. They just had these guidelines and they let the authors run with them. So especially in Whispers, Whispers would have quiet horror, then it would have a suspense thriller, and then it would have just a straight fantasy story, like made by David Drake or something like that. So they were really speculative fiction anthologies. And one of the things I see a lot of today, last 5 or 6 years, and I don't have anything against them necessarily. Let's be honest, I've sold stories to these anthologies, but a lot of the anthologies are very like, they have a theme, like this really like specific theme. And I just wanted to edit an anthology where I'm like, okay, liminal spaces. Liminal spaces is that ghostly in between places where we're not, and I just wanted writers to kind of run with that idea. And that was kind of, and then I pitched it, I developed a relationship with Joe Sullivan at Cemetery Gates, who's a local guy here in Binghamton, doing a really nice job there. They've they started out self-publishing their own stuff, and then they got a little tired of that. And they're like, well, we want to just become a full-fledged small press publisher. And they've done a really, really nice job. So when I pitched him the idea, he said, that sounds like a great idea. And that was my idea for Liminal Spaces, was just develop this idea and then see where all these authors took that idea.
Yeah, and I've read the whole thing. Of course, I wanted to know what everybody else was writing because I knew I'd written for it. And when you approached me about it, you said that, as you mentioned earlier, one of the things you liked about some of the anthologies that you read was that, you had a wide variety of types of stories that were in the anthology. So when you approached me, you said, I mostly write fantasy. And, you were like, it'd be cool if we could have like a fantasy liminal space story.
Yes.
And so that's, of course, what I wrote. I'll have you know that the story I wrote for it now is in my head as a, potential world. And
I saw you posting about this. That's probably got to be the best thing for an editor to hear is, I had him write the story for me. He probably thought it was a one-off. And now he's like, I can't get that story out of my head. Now I got to do something with it.
Yeah, I've certainly, in my head, I've certainly said, okay, I could see how I could turn this into, it's an entire novel. So the setup for the world that for my story that ended up in Liminal Spaces is there's a lot more potential there now since I've written the story. But I would say that my story does kind of stand out in the anthology in the respect that I think it's the only one that was basically its own secondary world.
Yep.
Everything else I think was set in our world.
And I had reached out to several other fantasy authors, and some of them didn't have time in their schedule. Some of them had committed to the story, then couldn't come through. It was just one of those things. I was hoping, for they would have a couple more in there. I did like Michael Wehunt's story, because I felt that had a very Robert E. Howard, weird Western kind of, and that's what I wanted to see, that kind of like diverse, here's a ghost story, here's a fantasy story, here's this weird Lovecraftian Western story. That's kind of what I envisioned for it. So
yeah, I was gonna say the Weird West story was probably the closest one to my kind of story in it. So hopefully what people have picked up here is that there is certainly a wide variety of different kinds of I would say that pretty much all of them, it's very quiet horror. It's not like in your face horror. For the most part, they're all very quiet horror stories. So was this your very first editing experience?
It wasn't my first, probably about 10 years ago. They're not around anymore, but I was really fortunate when I started out in the horror genre. I got involved with a very small publishing company called Shroud Magazine. Shroud Publishing, Shroud Magazine. So they publish books and they also publish a magazine. And they were actually there. I wrote a book that was really my first standalone book. They had a series about this kind of ne'er-do-well, demon hunter, things like that. And they hired me to write one of the stories. But I also asked Tim Deal, who used to run it, I said, I love Halloween. I would love to edit a special Halloween issue. and that was actually and that's what kind of stuck that bug in there. Like I really love. Now that was a little bit different. That was for this one being my first time out. I just did invite only. The Halloween issue of Shroud, that was just open submission. So I had a lot of submissions that I had to weed through, but it was a really, really nice experience pulling. Again, it was I had zombie stories in there. I had ghost stories. Alethea Contis wrote kind of a slightly supernatural folklore story, and it was just a lot. And I also got solicited all the nonfiction articles for that. So that was what really kind of like, I really want to do this again. And I was going to do it again for Shroud, and then they unfortunately, as a lot of these things do nowadays, because Tim was basically a one-man show, and unfortunately it had to fold. But that after that experience, I'm like, I really enjoyed it. A lot of fun, So
okay, so what you've talked about it a little bit, I guess. Open call versus invite only. So how is the experience different this time for the not a magazine, it's an actual book anthology?
Well, especially because this was pro pay, because I wanted my first time out, having never done the anthology before, and also too, my life is a little bit. Back when I did the Halloween issue of Shroud, my kids were very little, and they really didn't take up a whole lot of time. Right. So now, my daughter goes to my school where I teach. We're going here, we're going there. So, and now also my writing career is a lot more involved than it was when I did the Shroud, when I edited that issue of Shroud. So my concern this time out was like, I'm afraid of getting deluged with submissions, that I'd be late. I just want to handpick some authors that I know are going to deliver. And then I've talked to Joe about it. Once we get to a point where we feel like Liminal Spaces has kind of earned out its budget, the next one I would like to only fill half the TOC with selections, and the rest of them, what I would love to do is just do a blind submission.
Yeah.
I would love to just have the story in front of me and have no idea who wrote it. I think that'd be a really unique experience. Just be like, okay, this story wowed me. I don't know who wrote this story, but this story wowed me. And I think last time Joe and I talked, he was thinking maybe, next year, something like that, when we feel like it's kind of earned out, then we would explore doing this second edition or second volume. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then eventually, my goal will just be open editions across the board. I kind of wanted to baby step my way into it.
So, but you're thinking the next one would be called like Liminal Spaces Volume 2?
I would love to do that. Yeah, like I miss like well, and when I say I miss, because I miss the Shadows and Whispers and Borderlands were long before but I feel like that would be great to have this recurring anthology where not only are writers competing to get into it, but people are like, oh, who's going to be in the next? Maybe I'm being a little facetious here, thinking that anyone would care that much, but I'd love it to get to be like, oh, who's going to be in Liminal Spaces this time? Or the writer's like, oh man, I hope I get into the next Liminal Spaces. That's like my pie in the sky, that not that I really want to be that popular, but I don't see us having that. Like, back in the 80s, you had 5 or 6 different reoccurring anthologies, and we don't have that now. We just have kind of one and done anthologies. And I would love to be like, oh, here's the 4th installment of Liminal Spaces. What did the story, what do the authors do with the stories this time? That's my pie in the sky. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's what I'd love to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, Zombies is doing the half thing at the moment, and half invite and then half open call. And I will warn you, you get a lot of submissions to the open call. So yeah, if you're going to do the open call, you got to factor in lots of reading time for that.
My first official gig with Cemetery Dance was Slush Reader. Over 500 submissions for the magazine. Let me tell you, that was something else. That was.
Yeah, I think the anthology that got the most submissions for zombies for the open call was the apocalyptic one, and
Right.
we had like 850 submissions for that one. And I think the lowest one we've had, well, since we've been established, since people know what Zombies Need Brains is, has probably been, we only got 150 submissions, so that's the lowest. But we've been averaging right around 450, 500 submissions per anthology.
Wow. Yep.
So yeah, you can expect that. I would definitely go into it with that expectation.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, we kind of skipped what we're drinking, so let's take a pause here and talk about what we're drinking tonight. So go ahead with what you're having.
Okay, so I'm a spice person. I have a pretty high spice level, and so I discovered this recently. It's Old Smoky Mango Habanero whiskey, and it's got a really nice sweet front taste and a nice little burn back taste. And I always like to mix it with either ginger ale or ginger beer. And then I garnish it with, like, I don't know if the garnishes actually affect the taste. I just like putting the garnish in. I got the garnish of the lemon and the lime and some of my own canned peppers that I can every year. So that's what I'm enjoying this evening. And this is my third glass. So. And I also have it in a cool little skull glass too.
The skull glass, of course. You're a horror author.
Right.
I'm surprised you don't have an actual skull that you're drinking it out of.
That would be cool.
Everybody, I'm just drinking my usual Woodford Reserve tonight. I'm almost out of this bottle though, so we'll see what I end up drinking next. What bottle I get after this one. But
have you ever had Uncle Nearest?
Uncle Nearest?
Uncle Nearest.
Is that what I should try next?
Well, I don't know if you can find a bottle. So I was introduced to this last summer. I guess Uncle Nearest was the guy who was responsible for the Jack Daniel's formula back in the 1800s.
Okay.
But he was black, so he didn't get the credit for it.
Oh, of course.
So many years later, and now they have Jack Daniel. They have the British brand called Uncle Nearest, and it's 100 proof whiskey, and it has no business being this smooth. 100 proof whiskey should not be this smooth. But I know that I have a friend who's like a whiskey snob. Like he went to Tennessee to tour the distilleries this summer, and he said that they're changing the bottle, so they're not bottling anymore until the old bottles are used up. So you might not. I got lucky. I found a bottle of it at C&BD Liquors on Front Street, and it's Uncle Nearest, and it's 100 proof, and it's really good. A little too smooth.
I'll have to keep an eye out for that then. Like I said, I'm almost out of this Woodford, so
Woodford's good.
I
had a friend who was drinking Woodford like all the time. I'm like, well, I got to find out what this is like, and it was good. I enjoyed it.
I really enjoy it. It's a very good bourbon. Okay, so that's what we're drinking. And let's shift gears then, because you don't just edit anthologies, you of course write your own stuff. So let's talk about your most recent release, which I think came out on April 1st, right? The Night Road?
Yep. Yeah, so the Night Road is one of those interesting things where I actually sold the Night Road to Cemetery Dance several years ago before I came to work for them. So now I'm working for them and I'm handling my own release, which is like, I don't necessarily mind it, but I just hope that nobody's like, oh, he's working at the publishing company, he's using it to publish his own books. It was one of those things where I sold it to them, and then several years later, I got brought on. And it was I initially sold it to them as part of their limited edition signature series edition, which means it's got about 28 illustrations throughout. And their limited edition line is a little backed up. So we kind of came to an agreement that why don't we publish it in ebook and paperback, so we can get it out there to readers. It takes place in my mythical town, Clifton Heights, New York, up in the Adirondacks, because we used to go to the Adirondacks all the time as a kid. And when my wife and I first got married, we had a friend of the family who had a cabin up there for the first 5 years, even before we had kids, we built my cabin. I just love the atmosphere of the Adirondacks. So I decided to create my own little town there. And it's quiet horror, but there's elements of folk horror there too, a little bit delving into Irish myth and mythology, with on the Morrigan, and the Phantom Queen, and the Night Road. And again, I enjoy playing with mythology. Probably, hopefully, mythology scholars are like offended by the way I just love to kind of play with. Well, the nice thing about mythology and folklore and folk tales is they're very mutable. Like I love what Neil Gaiman does with folk tales, and like he makes them his own thing. So basically, it's a story about Grace, who's was a championship high school runner, cross country runner, track athlete. Now she's in college. And something terrible has happened that soured her toward running, but she's also addicted to running. It's her only release. It's like she's been soured to the whole thing of running because it's a traumatic event in her past, but it's the only release she has. And her sister's also basically dying, on her deathbed. So Grace is running all the time, and she ends up discovering this mysterious path in the woods one day when she's running, and she sees another jogger ahead of her, and she comes kind of be consumed with trying to catch this jogger. And that's how the supernatural elements unfold, with finding out what it is that happened to Grace. Why is her sister, dying? And who is this mysterious runner in black? And I did a little bit of research about Irish communities in the Adirondacks, especially in the 30s and the 40s, and I really enjoyed, writing it. Again, it's got about 28 illustrations, I think, on the inside. So yeah, it's a novella by the Night Road. And it's one of those ones where at the very end of the novel, I had this opportunity to really deliver this visceral, like I said, I write quiet horror. So most of the stuff I don't write is graphic. And this isn't really graphic in a sense of like blood or guts, but it's graphic in the import. And I was like, do I shy away from this scene or just do I show it? And I'm like, you got to show it. I mean, at this point, you got to show this at the end. I mean, that's what delivers the emotional punch that the readers have been waiting for. And that's currently on Amazon and paperback ebook, and so far people seem to be responding pretty well to it.
Yeah, I've only heard good things about it. I haven't had a chance to read it myself yet, but I am sure I will, because you're very local to me, so I'm sure we're going to be at a signing together or something along those lines.
Right.
So a lot of our listeners are actually writers. So one of the things that I've heard about your writing is that you write everything out longhand ahead of time. So go into that a little bit. Why do you write things out longhand ahead of time? Like, is there a reason for it, a particular reason for it, or is it just your process? What? Tell us.
So here's what happened. I'm looking at the date of my laptop. So about 12 years ago, I had gotten this gig for Shroud Publishing. They had this series called the Hiram Grange Chronicles. Again, about this like ne'er-do-well. He's a drug using philanderer, but he's the only thing that's going to save our universe. And I got opportunity to write one of the books, and at that point I was typing only, and I was trying to type, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't working. And I said, okay, I'm going to print out the 30 pages I have, get my pen out. I'm going to get a notebook. I'm just going to rewrite this thing from the start. And then I ended up writing the whole novella by hand. And that habit has stuck. And in fact, there's been a couple times throughout the years where I've been like, oh, I need to be more productive. I need to just try to type my rough drafts. And I just look at that blank screen and I freeze. It's actually more productive for me to just go ahead and write the first draft. And I really can't explain to you why I enjoy it. I mean, my handwriting's atrocious. And but there's something about having that piece of paper, that pen, the tactile feel of doing it. You sit there and kind of mull over a word, and here's a word. No, I don't like that. Cross that out. I like this word better. There's been times where I'll have to just rewrite a whole paragraph because I didn't like it. And then when I do my edits, I print out the hardcover and I sit there and do line edits as well. And I don't really know why it is. I think I think it has something to do with a touch, because all my hobbies are tactile. Like I like to build the monster models. I've got a nice little collection going of Frankenstein and Phantom of the Opera, Michael Myers, and I like to build car models. So there's always been something about that tactile. I love just kind of fiddling with things. So that's, I think, where that comes from. I just enjoy just sitting down and just right. And I've gotten to the point now where I keep a notebook in my car, I keep a notebook in my satchel, a small notebook in my pocket if I can kill like 5 minutes here and just jot something down. And it's just become my thing. Like I said, there's been a couple times where I've tried to just like skip that and just type because it's faster, but then it ends up being slower because I don't like it. I don't feel. So yeah, so I handwrite everything first. I guess just because I enjoy it that way. So.
Well, I mean, one of the things I like to point out on all these interviews and whatnot is that everybody's process is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to figure out what works best for you. And obviously the handwritten is what works best for you. You certainly aren't the only person, only writer out there that I know that writes things out by hand to start everything off. I personally could never do that. And my drawback would be that I can't write fast enough to keep up with what's in my head. So I basically have to do the typing because otherwise I'm not gonna get everything I want to get down. But like you said, it's you got to figure out what works best for you. And so I think it's really cool that that handwriting the story out is what works best for you in this situation. So I'm assuming that you wrote The Night Road that way.
Yes, it did. Yep. I wrote that all.
And would you say that there's anything in The Night Road that came from that particular process? I mean, anything in particular? Like that if you had written it out on a computer, that it would have been different?
One thing I found that when I handwrite, and at first, this is why there's been times early on in my career, I get frustrated and be like, oh, I'm not going fast enough, I need to type. But I've come to accept it. When I handwrite, I'll be honest, there's some times where I'll find myself wandering down rabbit trails and decide, no, I don't need that. I don't need that story. But there are times where I sometimes just need to write. Like Robert McCammon explained it best when he said that very often for him, writing is like working a Rubik's Cube. He's not quite sure. I'm turning it here. I'm turning it there. Oh, look at that. I got one side green. Now I'm going to. So I think with the handwriting, a lot for me is a lot like working that Rubik's Cube. Or maybe I'll come down the next morning and look at the last 3 paragraphs I wrote last night and be like, no, that's no good. we need to go somewhere else with that. Or maybe I didn't have a clear idea where I was going. But then that morning I'll write something and a line will come to me. I'll be like, oh, there it is. There it is right there. There's my direction. And I think being comfortable with that has allowed me, being comfortable with that writing process and is allowed me to work my own personal Rubik's Cube when I'm trying to, because there are some things in The Night Road where I had initially planned where then when I finally sat down and wrote them, I was like, this is not going to work. This doesn't look good on paper. This is not. does not work, and we got to do something different. So
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't do this myself, so I'm just spitballing here. But my guess would be that if you're writing things out longhand, it gives you more opportunity to think.
yes,
Yep. And so you're thinking a little bit more about whether this is working or not, and because you're writing it out by hand, it gives you the opportunity to change it before you get there and screw it up.
Especially with I think with backstory. That's what I find is I'll write a whole page of backstory and be like, I don't really need this. Like, it's weird though. It's weird though. I needed the backstory, but then after a page and a half of handwriting the backstory, then when it's time to type it and looking at that and going, I don't really need any of that. But at the time, I needed it to dial into the character or something like that. So
yeah, well, I think that happens with the typing too, where
yes,
you have a whole day where you sit down and you're typing and like you said, it's basically just backstory. But by the time you're typing it, you don't necessarily realize that. But then when you go back and look at it, you're just like, oh yeah, this is good stuff for me to know, but it's not anything that's necessary for the story.
Right. Yes.
So I mean, it's incorporated into the story, but you don't need to sit down and explain it.
Right.
So yeah, I think that happens with the typing as well. So holy crap, we've already used 45 minutes. Doesn't feel like 45 minutes, but maybe that's the alcohol time.
I guess that's a good thing. I guess that's better than you being like, oh my God, will he shut up? It's only been 25 minutes.
I don't think I've ever had one of these drinking with authors where that's happened. Usually it's more like, holy crap, we're like running out of time here. But do you have any like little secrets you can give the readers about what's coming for Cemetery Gates and whatnot? Or
Cemetery Dance, you mean?
Say it again.
Cemetery Dance.
Oh, Cemetery Dance. Yeah. I keep saying Cemetery Gates, but
well, I edited the anthology for Cemetery Gates. So one of the things we're really excited about with Cemetery Dance is this October we're going to be re-releasing a short story collection called Every House is Haunted by Ian Rogers. It was originally published by Cheesing Publications, and they went under many years ago because of a royalties scandal that we don't want to talk about. But when I got the job, Ian approached me, and what's really exciting is that one of the stories is going to be starting production soon as a Netflix feature film, being produced by Sam Raimi.
Wow.
Sam Raimi has also offered a blurb for the collection.
Oh, cool.
So what we're really excited about is October. We're going to be publishing a book with not only a Sam Raimi blurb on the cover, but hopefully one of those nice little circular red and black stickers that say now a Netflix feature film.
Yeah.
Although we really have to wait for that because from what I understand, Netflix is really picky about that. They won't let us actually do that until the production actually starts. So, but we're really excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why they're careful about that. Just with zombies and stuff, I try not to announce anything until I have like ironclad, you've signed the contract, you've...
It was very surreal though, because Ian Rogers emailed me and said, so Sam Raimi had some time while I was working on the Multiverse of Madness to give us a blurb. And I'm like, let me just sit and replay that in my head. While he's working on the Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange, he was able to write us. It was a little surreal, I gotta say. So,
well, that's cool. I'm glad things are headed in good directions for you. So obviously people should be paying attention to you. So why don't you tell them where they can find you, on social media and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So I have two profiles on Facebook. One is just the Kevin B. Lucia profile. That's my personal profile with all my writing and the general insanity that is my life. The other profile is Cemetery Dance ebooks, and it still comes up as Kevin Lucia. One has my picture, one has the Cemetery Dance logo. So you can add both of those, especially if you want to keep up what's going on with Cemetery Dance. And on Twitter, I'm just Kevin B. Lucia. So yeah, all are welcome.
Everybody should go check all of those social media sites out, obviously. And you should check out the Night Road. And just for a personal plug, you should also check out Liminal Spaces.
Should, absolutely.
So once again, I have a story in that one. Kevin edited that one. And thank you for sitting down and chatting with us for a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Catch everybody later. Watch for the next Drinking with Authors episode. I don't know what exactly it's going to be, but I'm sure it'll be fun and exciting. So check everybody out later. Bye.